This video was brought to you by Nebula. As Israel-Palestine divisions within the EU have become increasingly apparent, Ireland has emerged as one of the, if not the most pro-Palestine countries in Europe. Now, Ireland's relatively pro-Palestine stance is nothing new, and Ireland has a unique interest in the Israel-Palestine conflict, with Republicans generally being pro-Palestine and loyalists being pro-Israel. It's not even uncommon to see Palestinian flags at Republican marches, or being burnt at loyalist ones, or even at Celtic football matches. This sentiment hasn't gone entirely unnoticed in Palestine either though, and many Palestinians have been flying Irish flags in the past month. However, Ireland's already tense relationship with Israel has hit a drastic new low in the past few weeks, after a series of undiplomatic comments by Israeli politicians. Israel's heritage minister suggested that Gazans should, quote, go to Ireland or the desert if they want to avoid being nuked. While a senior Israeli diplomat in Ireland accused Ireland of funding Hamas's tunnels or terror, and Israel's ambassador to Ireland accused the Irish president of violating the country's long-standing neutrality policy and spreading misinformation after he accused Israel of breaking international law. In response, opposition politicians have called for Ireland to expel the Israeli ambassador, and while the incumbent Prime Minister Leo Varadkar has so far refused, in comments defending the decision, he has likened Israel to Russia. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the history of Israel-Ireland relations, why things are getting worse, and why this downward trend is likely to continue. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So the first thing you need to say is that Israel and Ireland didn't always have such tense relations. In fact, in the 1920s and 30s, when both countries were vying for statehood, Ireland was one of Israel's staunchest supporters. Now, this was in part because Zionists in Israel had connections to Irish nationalists, especially via Fianna Fáil president and Irish head of state, Eamon de Valera. De Valera's right-hand man was a revisionist Zionist called Robert Briscoe, and Briscoe would go on to become a special advisor to Zionist militant leader Menahem Begin, the future Israeli prime minister and founder of the incumbent Likud party. Plus, Israel's chief rabbi at the time, who, by the way, also happens to be the current president's grandfather, had previously been chief rabbi of the Irish Free State and lobbied de Valera to help to provide a safe haven for European Jews, which is one of the reasons the 1937 Irish Constitution provides protection specifically for Jews. But the main reason that much of Ireland sympathised with Israel's struggles against what they saw as colonial British interference, especially after the Peel Commission announced a plan to partition Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state in 1937. After this plan was rejected, in 1939 the UK produced a white paper, instead legislating for a binational state, but reducing Jewish immigration by roughly 80%. Now, this didn't go down well with the Zionists, not least because it guaranteed an Arab majority in the country, and it also led to illegal Jewish immigration accelerating, straining into ethnic tensions yet further. From an Irish perspective, the problems that Israel were dealing with were the consequence of British meddling, and the talk of a partition brought back memories of the 1921 partition of Ireland. Addressing the League of Nations Assembly in 1937, de Valera described the partition as perhaps the worst of many solutions that have been proposed. Now, the Irish and Zionists' experiences in the early 20th century also had a number of other similarities that motivated a mutual affinity. Both saw statehood as a means to disprove prejudged European stereotypes, had an interest in the revival of a national language, and were backed by large diasporas in the United States. However, the two sides started falling out in the 1940s. And this was in part because the Vatican had always had a significant influence over Ireland's foreign policy. And in 1948, the Pope criticised Israel for asserting control over Jerusalem, calling for multinational supervision to ensure its international character. In the 1980s, there were also significant tensions over the treatment of Irish soldiers serving in UNIFIL, the UN peacekeeping force in southern Lebanon. That's because in 1980, 3 Irish soldiers were killed by an Israeli-backed Lebanese militia, and the Irish government blamed Israel directly or indirectly for at least 15 of the 45 soldiers killed between 1978 and 2000. Things deteriorated yet further in 2010 when Ireland expelled an Israeli diplomat after it was revealed that Israeli assassins had forged Irish passports in the killing of a Hamas official. But the real reason that Ireland turned on Israel is that by the 1970s, Ireland, along with much of the rest of the world, no longer saw Israel as a minority state being oppressed by British colonial forces, but rather as a colonial state supported by Britain oppressing the local Palestinian population. Now, a lot of this has to do with Yasser Arafat, the charismatic founder of Palestinian nationalism that created the Fatah organization in 1958 and became the chairman of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1969. Arafat managed to bring the Palestinian cause to the international stage and explicitly described it as an anti-colonial struggle. In 1980, Ireland became the first member of the European Union to recognise the PLO, and has been a staunch advocate of a two-state solution ever since. Relations were then further strained by the fact that, having been quite left-wing in the 50s and 60s, Israel and Zionism took a rightward turn in the 70s, while at the same time Irish republicanism was going in the opposite direction, taking on more explicitly socialist tones. Israel-Ireland relations have deteriorated even further in the past few years, though, as Ireland has criticised the expansion of Israeli settlements on the West Bank, and in 2021, the Irish Parliament voted unanimously to condemn what they described as the de facto annexation of Palestinian land, becoming the first European Union member state to do so. Ireland also resisted the European Commission's announcement that it would be suspending aid to Palestine in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attacks, with Varadkar accusing von der Leyen of lacking balance, and has also been one of the few EU states to call for a ceasefire instead of just a humanitarian pause. Israeli officials and ministers have reacted to all of this with some pretty undiplomatic comments, and most of the Irish opposition is now calling for Israel's ambassador to be expelled. This is perhaps not a particularly prudent move from Israel, not least because European support for Israel is currently wavering as the Israeli assault, but also because the EU's common foreign and security policy requires unanimity, which gives each individual member state a veto power and therefore significant sway over its direction. Israel-Ireland relations are only likely to get worse, though, with polling implying a Sinn Féin victory at the next Irish elections. Sinn Féin are perhaps the most pro-Palestinian political party in Europe. They've previously expressed their support for the BDS movement against Israel, and in 2006, their human rights spokesperson in Dublin described Israel as one of the most abhorrent and despicable regimes on the planet. Even now, their leader has a Palestinian flag on their Twitter header and has accused Israel of prosecuting a slaughter in Gaza.
That's unfortunately all we have time for on YouTube today. But if you enjoyed this video and want to support us in making more of this kind of content, then you should check out Nebula. That's the creator-built and creator-owned streaming service where you can watch all of our videos and podcasts across our channels, totally ad-free. Plus, we post some of our videos on there early, and there's a bunch of exclusive content already there waiting for you on the platform. Now, if that wasn't enticing enough, Nebula is also full of incredible content from other creators you know and love, like Johnny Harris, Real Life Law, and Legal Eagle, as well as lots of cool creators you haven't even discovered yet. And the best thing is that this can all be yours for the price of just $2.50 per month. So check it out by clicking the link in the description, and make sure you use our link so they know you came from us, which will help us produce more content in the future.